I walked back into the house because I'd forgotten my reading glasses on the dining room table. At 70 years old, those moments of forgetfulness have become more frequent than I would like to admit. I opened the front door carefully without making a sound, and that's when I heard my son, Robert, talking on the phone in the living room. His tone was different. There was something in that laugh that chilled my blood. I froze in the hallway when I heard him say, with a malicious, gut-wrenching chuckle, "I can only imagine her face when she sees the empty account, honey. It's done. I transferred all the money to your account, just like we planned." I felt the floor move beneath my feet. My own son, my only son, was talking about me as if I were a stranger, as if I were his victim. I leaned against the hall wall, trying to process what I had just heard. Robert continued talking in a voice I had never known, cold and calculating. "Don't worry, Sarah. She never suspected a thing. She trusts me too much. It's always been that way. Too naive for her own good." Every word was like a direct stab to the heart. I recognized the name Sarah, his wife, the woman who had entered our lives barely 2 years ago with that perfect smile and those sweet words that I now understood were completely fake. My legs were trembling, but I forced myself to stay put, to keep listening, even though every word was tearing me apart inside. $280,000, my love, Robert continued with that triumphant tone that turned my stomach. That's everything she had in that main account. It's ours now. We can buy that beach house you wanted so much, the new car. Everything. $280,000. The money my husband and I had saved during 40 years of hard work. The money from the sale of the pharmacy we built from scratch. The money that represented my security, my peace of mind, my future. And my own son had just stolen it from me, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. My mind flew back to the past, to those days when my life was completely different. 5 years ago, when my husband Arthur passed away from a sudden heart attack, I thought I would never recover from that pain. We had built a beautiful life together, full of love, work, and sacrifice. The pharmacy we opened when we were barely 25 years old became our pride, our legacy. We worked side by side for decades, serving the community, knowing every customer by name, being a part of their lives. Robert was our only son, the center of our universe. We raised him with love, but also with values, or so I thought. He was always a smart kid, perhaps a little spoiled, but I thought that was normal. When Arthur died, Robert was by my side at the funeral, holding me up when my legs couldn't take it anymore. He helped me with all the processes, with the endless paperwork that follows a death. It was he who suggested selling the pharmacy. "Mum, you've worked enough. You deserve to rest, to enjoy life," he would tell me with that affectionate voice that I now knew was pure manipulation. We sold the pharmacy 3 years ago for a considerable sum. I invested part of the money, saved another part in savings accounts. I made sure I had a solid financial cushion for my senior years. Robert knew every detail of my finances because I, in my naivety, trusted him blindly. He was my son, my blood. I never imagined he could betray me in such a vile and calculated way. 2 years ago, he met Sarah at a business conference. She was younger than him, maybe about 35, with that artificial beauty that comes from well-done cosmetic work and perfect makeup. From the first moment I saw her, something inside me warned me that there was something strange about her. But I silenced that little voice because I wanted to see my son happy. The wedding was modest but elegant. I paid a large part of the expenses because Robert insisted he was going through a tough financial time in his consulting business. Sarah hugged me that day and called me Mum. with tears in her eyes that I now realize were completely false. She told me she had always dreamed of having a mother-in-law like me, loving and generous. How foolish I was to believe her, to let myself be wrapped up in those sweet words that hid such dark intentions. After the wedding, things began to change subtly. Robert started visiting me less frequently. When he came, he always brought Sarah, and she dominated every conversation. She talked constantly about money, investments, and property. She asked questions that at the time seemed innocent to me about my bank accounts, my savings, my plans for the future. I answered honestly because I never imagined I was being evaluated, studied, prepared to be stripped of everything I had. 6 months ago, Robert suggested something that I now see was the beginning of the final plan. Mum, you should put me as power of attorney on your main account. That way, if something happens to you, if you have an emergency, I can help you immediately without bureaucratic complications. It sounded reasonable, even logical. At 70 years old, the idea of having someone trustworthy with access to my accounts in case of emergency seemed sensible. I went to the bank with Robert, signed the papers, and gave him that power that he had now used to destroy me. Robert's voice pulled me out of my painful memories. Yes, honey. In a few hours, I'll head over to my mother's place to see how she's doing. I'm sure she'll have already gone to the bank and discovered the account is empty. I'll pretend to be surprised. I'll tell her it must be a bank error, that we'll look into it together. By the time she figures out the truth, it will be too late. He laughed again, that laugh I will never forget, that laugh that turned my son into a stranger before my eyes. I felt something break inside me at that moment. It wasn't just my heart shattering. It was the entire image I had built of my son over 70 years of life. The Robert I knew, the little boy I cared for when he had a fever, the teenager I helped with his homework, the man I supported in every important decision of his life. He simply didn't exist. He had been replaced by this stranger who spoke of robbing me as if it were an achievement to be proud of. Tears finally rolled down my cheeks as I listened to him continue plotting my supposed ruin with that woman who called herself my daughter-in-law. The best part of all, Robert continued with that tone that made my insides churn, is that she will never suspect it was intentional. She'll think someone hacked her account, that it was a banking error, anything but her own son stole from her. She's too trusting, too innocent. She always has been. Every word was like poison falling onto an open wound. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk into that room and confront him immediately. But something stronger than the pain stopped me. It was rage, yes, but it was also something more calculated, colder. If I walked in now and faced them without concrete proof, without a plan, Robert could manipulate the situation. He could convince me that I had misunderstood everything. He could use my age against me and make me doubt my own sanity. I slowly backed up toward the front door, each step measured and silent, like a thief in my own house. I left with the same caution with which I had entered and closed the door without making the slightest noise. Once outside, I had to hold on to the entrance railing because my legs were trembling so much I thought I would collapse right there. The afternoon sun hit my face, and for a moment the world seemed too bright, too normal for the tragedy I had just discovered. Neighbors were walking their dogs, children were playing in the street. Life was continuing its course as if nothing had changed, as if my world hadn't completely collapsed in a matter of minutes. I walked to my car with automatic steps, not really thinking about where I was going. I sat down in the driver's seat and allowed myself to cry for the first time in 5 years since Arthur's death. I cried for the betrayal, for my naivety, for the years of unconditional love I had given a son who turned out to be capable of stabbing me in the back without the slightest remorse. I cried for Arthur, wishing with all my soul that he were here with me, while at the same time being grateful that he didn't have to witness this devastating betrayal from his only son. The pain was so intense that I felt like I was drowning, that I would never be able to breathe normally again. But then, in the middle of that sea of tears and desperation, something began to change inside me. It was as if a spark ignited in the deepest part of my being. It wasn't just rage I felt, it was determination. It was the absolute certainty that I would not stay quiet, that I would not let myself be destroyed by this betrayal. I had survived the death of my husband. I had built a business from scratch. I had faced decades of challenges and obstacles. I was not going to allow my own son to turn me into his victim without a fight. I angrily wiped away my tears and started the car engine. I had to think. I had to plan. I had to be smarter than them. As I drove aimlessly through the city streets, my mind started working at full speed. I began to review the past few months with new clarity, seeing signs I had completely ignored. I remembered how Sarah always found excuses to ask me about my finances. "Oh, Mum, Mary, I'm so envious of your financial stability. How did you manage to save so much? Which bank do you use for your accounts? Do you have investments?" I, the fool, would answer in great detail, proud to share the financial wisdom that Arthur and I had accumulated over the years. I never imagined that every answer was one more piece of the puzzle they were assembling to strip me of everything. I also remembered how much Robert had insisted that I put him as power of attorney on my main account. The first time he suggested it, I had hesitated. Something inside me told me it wasn't necessary, that I was still perfectly capable of handling my own finances. But he insisted for weeks. "Mum, it's just for precaution. Or what if you get sick? What if you have an accident? You need someone who can access your accounts in case of emergency." Sarah also joined the pressure. "Oh, Mum, Robert just wants to take care of you. It's normal for children to help their elderly parents with these things." Elderly, that word had bothered me at the time, but I let it go. Now I understood it was part of the strategy, to make me feel old, incapable, dependent. I also remembered the increasingly spaced-out visits. Before marrying Sarah, Robert would come to see me at least 3 times a week. We would have coffee together, talk for hours, and he would tell me about his work, his plans, his dreams. After the wedding, visits were reduced to once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and in the last few months, I barely saw him once a month. Whenever I asked him why he wasn't coming more often, he had perfectly elaborate excuses. "Work is too heavy, Mum. Sarah and I are very busy with a new project. You know how it is. Married life has its own demands." The pieces were starting to fit together with painful clarity. The constant questions about my health that previously seemed like concern now looked like what they really were. Attempts to evaluate how much more time they had before they could execute their plan without raising suspicion. Sarah's suggestions that I should write a clear and detailed will to avoid future legal problems I now understood as attempts to find out exactly how much money I had and where it was kept. Every conversation, every visit, every seemingly affectionate gesture had been calculated, measured, designed to bring them closer to my money. I stopped at a small park near downtown Boston and turned off the engine. I needed to think clearly, to push away the emotions that were clouding my judgment. I took out my phone and looked at the screen for several minutes before making a decision. I had to call someone. I needed help, but I had to choose wisely. I couldn't risk Robert finding out that I knew the truth before I was ready to face him. I dialed Rebecca's number without further hesitation. Rebecca had been my best friend for more than 40 years. We met when our children were in elementary school, and since then, we had shared everything: joys, sorrows, triumphs, and defeats. If there was anyone I could trust blindly in this moment of crisis, it was her. The phone rang 3 times before she answered with her cheerful, warm voice that always comforted me. Mary, what a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking of calling you to invite you out for coffee tomorrow. But her tone changed immediately when she heard my trembling voice. What happened? Are you okay? Where are you? I couldn't hold back the tears again as I told her everything I had heard. Each word came out broken, mixed with sobs that I couldn't control. Rebecca listened in complete silence, without interrupting me once, and when I finished speaking, all I could hear on the other end of the line was her agitated breathing. That crook, she finally said with a voice full of rage that I had never heard from her. That damned scoundrel. Mary, listen to me carefully. You're not going to let them get away with this. I'm coming right now. Tell me exactly where you are. I gave her the park's location, and she said she would arrive in 15 minutes. While I waited, I tried to calm down, breathe deeply, and organize my thoughts into something coherent. Rebecca arrived in record time. I watched her get out of her car with that determination that had always characterized her, and I felt immense relief knowing I wasn't alone in this. She got into my car and, without saying a word, hugged me tightly. That hug was like a balm for my shattered soul. I cried on her shoulder for several minutes while she stroked my hair and repeated over and over, "Calm down, friend. We're going to fix this. You are not going to be left with nothing. I promise you." When I finally calmed down enough to speak clearly, Rebecca took my face in her hands and looked me directly in the eyes. Now listen to me very carefully. I know you are shattered. I know you feel like your world has ended. But we can't let ourselves be ruled by emotions. We have to be smart, strategic. Robert and that viper Sarah think they have you in their hands, but we are going to show them they were completely wrong. She was right. Tears and pain weren't going to give me back my money, nor were they going to make Robert face the consequences of his actions. I needed a plan. I needed to act with a clear head and a guarded heart. The first thing you have to do, Rebecca continued with that practical tone I admired so much in her, is go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning. You need to talk to someone you trust, someone who can help you understand exactly what moves were made in your account, and if there's any way to reverse them or block the money. Do you know anyone at the bank who can help you? I thought for a moment and remembered Sebastian, the manager of the branch where I had kept my accounts for more than 20 years. He had always been kind and professional with me, and most importantly, he knew my financial history perfectly. Sebastian, I finally said, the manager of the main branch. He's known me for years. He knows I've always been careful with my money. If I explain the situation, I'm sure he'll help me. Rebecca nodded in approval. Perfect. First thing tomorrow morning, you go to the bank and talk to him. In the meantime, tonight you have to act as if you know nothing. If Robert goes to your house like he said he would, you have to feign absolute normalcy. You cannot let him suspect you discovered his plan, because that would give them time to move the money elsewhere or prepare an alibi. Do you think you can do that? The question made me hesitate for a moment. Could I really look my son in the face and pretend I didn't know he had betrayed me in the most vile way possible? Could I smile and converse normally when all I wanted was to scream at him, to ask him how he could have done this to me? But then I thought of Arthur. I thought of all the years we worked together, of all the sacrifices we made to build a secure future. I thought of the nights I spent awake, caring for Robert when he was a child and sick, of the times I went without things so he could have the best. I thought of all the love I had given him unconditionally throughout his life. And that thought, instead of weakening me, filled me with a strength I didn't know I possessed. Yes, I told Rebecca, with a voice much firmer than I felt inside. I can do it. I am going to do it. That money represents a lifetime of work and sacrifice. I won't let them take it without a fight. Rebecca smiled proudly and squeezed my hand tightly. That's the Mary I know. The strong woman who built a business from scratch, who raised a son alone after being widowed, who always faces problems head on. Now I'm going to tell you something else, and I want you to remember it well. Robert stopped being your son the moment he decided to steal from you. You owe no loyalty to someone who betrayed you this way. What you are going to do is not revenge. It is justice. It's taking back what rightfully belongs to you. Her words resonated within me like a hammer striking an anvil. She was right. The Robert I loved, the son I had raised with so much care, would never have been capable of doing something like this. This Robert who had planned to rob me was a stranger, and as such, I should treat him. We spent the next hour elaborating a detailed plan. Rebecca had that wonderful ability to think of every detail, every scenario. When you get home, she instructed me, act as if nothing happened. If Robert arrives and asks how you are, tell him you're fine, that you had a quiet day. Do not mention that you went looking for him. Tomorrow morning, as soon as the bank opens, you go and talk to Sebastian. Explain the whole situation. Tell him your son made transfers without your authorization using the power you gave him. That is misappropriation of funds. It's a crime. The bank has to help you track the money and, if possible, block it or reverse the transfers. And what if it's too late? I asked with a lump in my throat. What if they've already moved the money somewhere we can't recover it? Rebecca shook her head. I don't think so. Robert said he had just made the transfer, right? Banks have protocols for these kinds of situations, especially when older people are victims of financial abuse. Yes, Mary, that is exactly what your son did to you. Financial abuse against an elderly person. It is a serious crime, and the bank is obligated to help you. The idea that my own son could go to jail made my stomach turn, but at the same time, I felt a strange satisfaction thinking that he would finally face the consequences of his actions. You also need to document everything, Rebecca continued, taking a notepad out of her purse. Write down exactly what you heard today, with as many details as possible. The date, the time, the exact words they said. That will be important if this goes to court. And one more thing. From now on, record all your conversations with Robert and Sarah. Use your phone, leave it recording in your purse or your pocket. You need solid proof of what they did. The idea of recording my own son seemed surreal, like something out of a spy movie, but I understood it was necessary. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to recover what belonged to me, I needed irrefutable proof. We stayed in the park until it started to get dark, refining every detail of the plan. Rebecca insisted that I must stay calm at all times, that I couldn't let Robert see any sign that I knew the truth. You are an actress for one night, she told me with a sad smile. The performance of your life. Make him believe he still controls the situation, that his plan worked perfectly. Meanwhile, we will be working in silence to turn everything around. Finally, when the sky was completely dark, I felt ready to go home. Rebecca followed me in her car to make sure I got there safely, and before saying goodbye, she made me promise to call her as soon as I finished talking to Sebastian the next day. I entered my house with my heart pounding so hard I feared it could be heard from outside. The lights were on, and I recognized Robert's car parked in front of the entrance. I took 3 deep breaths, as Rebecca had taught me, and pushed the door open with a calm I didn't feel at all. Robert was sitting in the living room, looking at his phone with an expression of absolute tranquility that turned my stomach. When he saw me come in, he looked up and gave me that smile that had so many times brightened my days, and that now only caused me nausea. "Hi, Mum. Where were you? I called you several times, but you didn't answer." I had to use every ounce of self-control I possessed, not to throw myself at him and demand an explanation. Instead, I smiled as naturally as possible and put my purse on the dining room table. I went to visit Rebecca. You know how she is. When she starts talking, time flies by, and we didn't even realize the hours. The lie left my lips with a surprising ease. Robert nodded, without showing the slightest suspicion. Oh, that's good. I'm glad you spend time with your friends. Mum, it's important that you have a social life. His words sounded sweet, concerned, exactly like the loving son I thought I had until just a few hours ago. I wondered how many times in the last few months he had used that same false tone with me without me realizing it. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one where I spent afternoons reading or watching the news, and tried to act as normal as possible. And what are you doing here at this hour? Shouldn't you be home with Sarah? Robert shrugged with a careless gesture. She went out with some friends, and I thought I'd come visit you. We haven't spent time together in days. How ironic, I thought bitterly. He had barely visited me for months, and just today, the day he stole all my money, he decided it was a good time for a family visit. Of course, I now perfectly understood his real intentions. He wanted to be here when I discovered my account was empty. He wanted to see my reaction, pretend surprise and concern, and play the role of the devoted son who would do everything possible to help his poor, victimized mother. That's sweet of you, son, I managed to say, even though the words burned my throat. Do you want me to prepare some dinner? I have some chicken in the refrigerator. I can make that stew you liked so much when you were a kid. I saw a flash of something in his eyes, perhaps discomfort, or maybe guilt, but it disappeared so fast I thought I had imagined it. Don't bother, Mum. I already ate something before I came, but we can have some coffee if you like. I got up and walked toward the kitchen, grateful to have a few minutes alone to compose myself. My hands were shaking as I prepared the coffee, and I had to bite my lip not to scream in frustration and pain. While waiting for the coffee to be ready, my mind traveled to the past once again. I remembered the day Robert was born, how Arthur and I cried with joy holding him for the first time. I remembered his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. I remembered how I comforted him when he suffered his first heartbreak at 16, how I supported him when he decided to study business administration instead of medicine, as his father wanted. I remembered every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment of his life in which I was present, loving him unconditionally, sacrificing for him without expecting anything in return. At what moment did all that love turn into something he could betray so easily? At what moment did I stop being his mother and become simply a source of money he could exploit without the slightest remorse? The question tormented me, but I had no answer. Or perhaps the answer was too painful to accept. That my son had always been capable of this. That I had simply refused to see the signs because a mother's love can be blind when it comes to seeing her children's flaws. I thought of all the times Arthur had been stricter with Robert, and I had defended him. He's just a kid, I would say. He'll mature, he'll learn. How many opportunities had I given him to learn to be a better person, and he had simply chosen this path? I returned to the living room with 2 steaming cups of coffee and sat across from Robert. He was still looking at his phone, probably sending messages to Sarah to tell her everything was going according to plan. Is everything okay with work? I asked, trying to maintain a normal conversation. Robert looked up and nodded. Yes, Mum. Everything is perfect. In fact, things are going so well that Sarah and I are thinking about buying a bigger house. You know, thinking about the future, maybe having kids. The mention of a bigger house confirmed exactly what they were going to use my money for. They had probably already been looking at properties, planning how to spend what they stole from me. That's wonderful, son, I managed to say, even though I felt like I was choking. It's always good to plan for the future. Your father and I were always very careful with our money. That's why we were able to build a stable life." I watched Robert avert his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. Well, I thought bitterly, at least he still has some shame left. "Speaking of money, Mum," Robert said after an uncomfortable silence, "how are your finances going? Everything okay with the bank accounts? You haven't had any problems?" There it was, the question I had been waiting for since he arrived. He wanted to know if I had already discovered the theft. He wanted to prepare to act accordingly. I took a sip of coffee to give myself time to think about my answer. I had to be convincing. I had to make him believe I knew nothing. "No, son. Everything is perfect. You know I only check my accounts once a month, when the bank statement arrives. I don't like going into the online system all the time. All that technology makes me nervous." The lie worked perfectly. Robert visibly relaxed, his shoulders dropped, and that false smile returned to his face. "You're right, Mum. At your age, it's better not to complicate things with so much technology. But if you ever need help with anything at the bank, you know you can count on me." At your age? Those words hurt me more than he probably intended. He was infantilizing me, making me feel incapable. All part of his strategy to justify what he had done to me. We spent the next hour talking about trivial things. Robert told me about his work, about his plans with Sarah, about places they wanted to visit. I nodded and smiled at the appropriate moments, but my mind was completely elsewhere. I was thinking about how I was going to confront him, how I was going to get my money back, how I was going to make him pay for what he had done to me. When he finally got up to leave, he hugged me and kissed me on the forehead, as he had done 1,000 times before. "I love you very much, Mum. Take care." Those words, which would have filled me with warmth before, now only gave me a shiver. I closed the door behind him and slumped onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted. I had managed to act normal. I had managed to keep him from suspecting anything, but the effort had left me completely empty. I took out my phone and sent a message to Rebecca. I did it. Acted normal. Going to the bank tomorrow. Her response came immediately. "I'm proud of you. Tomorrow your recovery begins. Get some rest tonight. You're going to need it." I tried to follow her advice, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, recalling every moment of the betrayal, searching for signs I should have seen before. I remembered when he was 12 years old, and I caught him stealing money from my wallet. At the time, I justified it as childish curiosity, as a mistake any child could make. Arthur wanted to punish him severely, but I intervened. "He's just a child," I said. "He'll learn that it's wrong." Now I wondered if that had been the first clue of what was to come, if my indulgence at that moment had planted the seed of what was now a complete betrayal. I also remembered when he was 20, and we helped him pay off his credit card debts. He had spent uncontrollably, living beyond his means, and when he couldn't pay, we covered everything so he wouldn't ruin his credit history. At the time, I thought I was being a good mother, protecting him from the consequences of his youthful mistakes. Now I saw that all I had achieved was teaching him that there would always be someone to rescue him from his bad decisions. I woke up at 0 hours 6 minutes after barely 3 hours of restless sleep filled with nightmares. In my dreams, Robert was a little boy again, and I tried to reach him, but he kept moving farther away, laughing while I desperately shouted his name. I got up with a headache and an aching body, as if I had aged 10 years in a single night. I made myself a strong coffee and sat down to wait for the bank to open. I had decided to arrive exactly at 0 hours 9 minutes, as soon as the doors opened, to talk to Sebastian before the place filled up with customers, and I could have his complete attention. By 0 hours, 8 minutes, 30 seconds. I was ready, dressed in my beige suit that always made me feel more secure and professional. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. My eyes were swollen from the tears of the night before, and my face showed every one of my 70 years with brutal clarity. But there was something else in that gaze, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Pure, hard determination. I put on a little makeup to cover the dark circles, carefully styled my hair, and left the house with my head held high. Rebecca had sent me a message early. "I'll be thinking of you. Call me as soon as you leave the bank. You are strong. You are brave. You will get back what is yours." The journey to the bank seemed endless. Every red light was torture. Every minute that passed increased my anxiety. What if it was too late? What if Robert had already moved the money to some inaccessible place? What if the bank refused to help me because I myself had given my son the power to handle my account? The questions tormented me, but I tried to stay calm. I remembered Rebecca's words. I needed to be serene, articulate, convincing. I couldn't show up as a confused, emotional old woman. I had to show myself as what I was, an intelligent and capable woman who had been a victim of a crime and demanded justice. I arrived at the bank exactly at 0 hours 9 minutes. The security guard, a man named Orlando who had known me for years, greeted me with his usual kindness. "Good morning, Mrs. Mary. You're here early today." I returned the greeting with a smile that I hoped looked natural and headed directly to Sebastian's desk. He was reviewing some documents on his computer, but looked up when I approached and greeted me with a professional smile. "Mrs. Mary, it's good to see you. How can I help you today?" I sat in front of him and took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Sebastian, I need to talk to you about something very serious that happened with my account," I began with a steady voice, despite the tremor I felt inside. "My son made transfers from my account without my authorization, and I need to know exactly what happened and what I can do to get my money back." I watched Sebastian's expression immediately change from professional cordiality to genuine concern. "Without your authorization? But Mrs. Mary, your son Robert has power of attorney over your main account. Any transaction he makes is legally valid because you granted him that right." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, even though I expected them. "I know," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "I gave him that power thinking it was for emergencies, so he could help me if I ever needed it. I never imagined he would use it to rob me." Sebastian was silent for a moment, processing what I was telling him. Then he typed something into his computer, and his brow furrowed as he looked at the screen. "I see here that there were indeed 3 large transfers made from your account in the last 2 weeks. The most recent was yesterday afternoon, for an amount of $140,000. The previous 2 were 10 and 15 days ago, for $80,000 and $60,000, respectively. All were to an account in the name of Sarah Mendez Ruiz." The full name of my daughter-in-law coming out of Sebastian's lips made everything feel even more real, more painful. $280,000. All my liquid assets transferred to the account of that woman who had earned my trust only to destroy me. "I need you to help me block that account and get my money back," I told Sebastian with urgency in my voice. "Robert stole from me. He used the power I gave him in good faith to strip me of everything I have. There has to be something you can do." Sebastian ran his hands over his face with a look of worry. "Mrs. Mary, this is very delicate. Legally, your son had the right to make those transfers because you granted him power of attorney. However, if you allege a breach of trust and misappropriation, then we are talking about a crime. But for the bank to act, we need you to file a formal complaint with the authorities." The word complaint echoed in my head. Reporting my own son meant potentially sending him to jail, destroying his life, marking him forever with a criminal record. But then I remembered his voice on the phone the day before, that cruel laugh as he said he could imagine my face when I discovered the empty account. I remembered how meticulously he had planned everything with Sarah, how he had used my love and trust against me. I remembered the 40 years Arthur and I worked to build that wealth, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the deprivations. "I will file the complaint," I said in a firm, clear voice. Robert stopped being my son when he decided to steal from me. I will do everything necessary to recover what is mine and make him face the consequences of his actions. I saw a flash of admiration in Sebastian's eyes. It probably wasn't the first time he had seen cases of financial abuse against elderly people, but perhaps it was the first time he had seen a victim determined to fight. Sebastian began to explain the process patiently. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to immediately block your account so no more transfers can be made. Second, I'm going to generate a complete report of all transactions made in the last 3 months so you have detailed documentation. Third, I'm going to contact the bank's fraud department to inform them of the situation. They will initiate an internal investigation. And fourth, you will need to go to the district attorney's office today to file a formal complaint. With that complaint, the bank will be able to try to block or track the money that was transferred to your daughter-in-law's account." I nodded, making mental notes of each step. It was a complicated process, but at least there was a path forward, a possibility of justice. "Is there any chance of recovering the money?" I asked with a trembling voice. Sebastian sighed before answering. "It depends on several factors. If the money is still in the destination account, and we manage to block it before they move it, yes, there are good chances. But if they have already transferred it to another account or withdrawn it in cash, it will be much more complicated. Time is crucial here, Mrs. Mary. The faster you act, the more chances you have of recovering your wealth." His words filled me with a renewed urgency. I couldn't lose another minute. "Can you do all that right now? Block the account, generate the reports, contact the fraud department?" Sebastian nodded and immediately began working on his computer. While Sebastian was typing and making phone calls, my mind didn't stop working. I wondered what Robert and Sarah would be doing right now. Would they have already tried to move the money elsewhere? Would they be celebrating their victory? Or maybe Robert was feeling some remorse for what he had done to me. I immediately dismissed that last option. The Robert I had heard on the phone had no room for remorse. He was cold, calculating, capable of laughing at the pain he would cause his own mother. That wasn't the son I had raised, or maybe he had always been like that, and I had simply refused to see it. "Done," Sebastian said after almost 30 minutes of intense work. "Your main account is blocked. No one can make transactions from it, not even you for the moment, until the legal situation is resolved. Here is the complete report of all transactions from the last 3 months. As you can see, the 3 large transfers I mentioned were the only unusual operations. Before that, your account showed a very stable and predictable pattern, exactly as you have managed it all these years." He handed me a folder with several printed documents that I carefully placed in my purse. "I also contacted the fraud department. They will call you in the next 24 hours to conduct a more detailed investigation. And here is the address and phone number of the Specialized Financial Crimes Unit. You need to go today to file your formal complaint." I stood up from the chair with trembling legs, but with a new determination in my heart. "Thank you, Sebastian. You don't know how much I appreciate your help at this difficult time." He stood up as well and took my hands with a paternal gesture. "Mrs. Mary, I have known you for many years. I know you are a responsible person who is careful with your money. What your son did to you is unforgivable. I sincerely hope you manage to recover what is yours and that he faces the consequences of his actions." His words comforted me more than he probably imagined. I left the bank with the folder of documents pressed against my chest, as if it were an invaluable treasure. As soon as I left the bank, I called Rebecca and told her everything that had happened. She listened carefully, and when I finished talking, she said in a firm voice, "Perfect, Mary. Now you go directly to the district attorney's office to file that complaint. I'm heading there too. I don't want you to face this alone. I'll see you at the entrance in half an hour." Her unconditional support gave me renewed strength. I drove toward the district attorney's office with my heart racing. Every traffic light, every turn, brought me closer to the moment when I would have to officially say that my son was a thief, that the person who had come out of my womb and to whom I had dedicated my entire life had betrayed me in the most vile way. Rebecca was already waiting for me when I arrived. She hugged me tightly, and we walked together toward the inside of the building. The place was full of people, all with their own tragedies and problems. A young woman was crying in a corner while talking on the phone. An older man was staring into space with a lost expression. I wondered how many of those people had also been betrayed by their own loved ones. How many stories of pain and disappointment were hidden behind every face in that waiting room. We approached the information counter, and a tired-looking woman attended to us. "I'm here to file a complaint for misappropriation and financial abuse," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman handed us some forms and instructed us to wait for a call. We sat down on uncomfortable plastic chairs, and I began to fill out the papers with trembling hands. Every line I wrote was like stabbing a knife into my own heart. Name of complainant: Mary Martinez, Ruiz widow. Name of accused: Robert Ruiz Martinez, my son. Relationship to accused: mother. That last word made me stop. Mother. What a cruel irony. Mothers are supposed to protect their children, not report them to the law. But then I remembered that children are also supposed to take care of their parents, especially in old age, not steal everything they own. We waited almost 2 hours before being called. A young prosecutor named Sandra received us in her office. She had a serious but kind look that made me feel that maybe they would take me seriously. I handed her all the documents Sebastian had given me at the bank and began to tell her the whole story from the beginning. I told her how Robert had convinced me to put him as power of attorney on my account, how I had heard his phone conversation with Sarah about the transfers totaling $280,000. Sandra took notes constantly and asked me specific questions about dates, amounts, and details. "Mrs. Mary," Sandra said after listening to me for almost an hour, "what you describe is clearly a case of financial abuse against an elderly person and misappropriation. The fact that your son had power of attorney did not give him the right to use that power for his own benefit without your knowledge or consent. We are going to initiate a formal investigation, and I will immediately request the blocking of the account where the money was deposited." Her words filled me with hope. Finally, someone in a position of authority was taking my situation seriously. She was validating my pain and indignation. "How long will all this take?" I asked with anxiety. Sandra sighed before answering. "Legal processes can be slow. I'm not going to lie to you. But given that we have clear documentation and the crime is recent, we will act quickly. Within the next 48 hours, we should be able to block the destination account and summon your son and daughter-in-law for questioning. We will also request an order to review all their recent financial movements." The idea that Robert and Sarah would be summoned for questioning caused me mixed feelings. On one hand, I felt satisfaction that they would finally face the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, the pain of a mother who had failed to raise an honest son was tearing me apart inside. We left the district attorney's office 3 hours after entering. I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but I also felt a strange relief. I had taken the first step. I had formalized my complaint. I had set the machinery of justice in motion. Rebecca insisted we go eat something because I hadn't had a bite all day. We sat down in a small, quiet restaurant, and she ordered for both of us because I didn't have the energy even to read the menu. "I am so proud of you," Rebecca said, taking my hand across the table. "I know this is the hardest thing you've ever had to do in your life, but you are doing the right thing." "The right thing?" I repeated with a broken voice. "I just reported my own son to the law. What kind of mother does that?" Rebecca squeezed my hand harder. "A mother who respects herself. A mother who understands that love doesn't mean enabling abuse. A mother who knows that letting Robert get away with it not only harms you, but turns him into a criminal who could do the same to other people in the future." Her words made sense, but the pain was still unbearable. I thought of all the mothers who had had to face the reality that their children were not who they thought they were. How do you survive that kind of betrayal? How do you rebuild a life after that kind of disappointment? While we ate in silence, my phone started ringing. It was Robert. My heart skipped a beat. Did he already know what I had done? Had he received a notification from the bank? I looked at Rebecca for guidance, and she nodded. "Answer, but don't tell him anything yet. Keep acting normal." I took a deep breath and answered the call, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible. "Hello, son." Robert's voice sounded strained, worried, completely different from his confidence the day before. "Mum, did you try to use your bank account today? Because I received a notification that the account is blocked. I called the bank, but they said they couldn't give me any information and that you had to call them." There it was, the moment I had been waiting for. Robert had discovered that his plan had not gone as perfectly as he thought. "Blocked?" I said, feigning surprise. "No, I haven't tried to use the account today. Why would it be blocked?" I heard Robert breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "I don't know, Mum. It must be a bank error. Do you want me to come to your house and we'll go to the bank together to sort this out?" The irony of his offer would have made me laugh if I hadn't been so angry. "Don't worry, son. I'll take care of going to the bank tomorrow to ask. It's surely some system error." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you sure, Mum? I can go right now if you want." "I'm sure. Thank you for worrying." I hung up the phone, and my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. "Perfect," Rebecca said with a satisfied smile. "Now he knows something didn't go as planned, but he doesn't know exactly what. That will make him nervous. He's going to make mistakes. And in the meantime, justice is already in motion." We finished eating, and Rebecca insisted on accompanying me home. When we arrived, she made me promise to call her if Robert or Sarah showed up. "You are not alone in this," she reminded me before leaving. "You have all my help whenever you need it." That night, I sat in my empty living room, in that house that suddenly felt too big and too silent. I looked at the photographs that decorated the walls. Robert, as a baby. Robert Wood at his graduation. Robert T. on his wedding day. All those images of a life that now seemed like a lie. When exactly had everything broken? Had it been gradual, or was there a specific moment when my son had become this person capable of betraying me? I would probably never have those answers. 2 days of agonizing waiting passed before Sandra called me again. Her voice sounded professional, but there was a tone of urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Mrs. Mary, I need you to come to my office as soon as possible. We've discovered something important during our investigation." My heart began to beat hard as I quickly prepared to leave. I called Rebecca, and she insisted on accompanying me. On the way to the district attorney's office, my mind couldn't stop imagining what Sandra could have discovered. Had they found more looted accounts, more victims? Or had Robert perhaps managed to move the money, and there would be no way to recover it? When we arrived at Sandra's office, we encountered an unexpected surprise. There was a man sitting in one of the waiting chairs, a gentleman of approximately 75 years old with a defeated and tired look. Sandra brought us into her office along with him and formally introduced us. Mrs. Mary, I present to you Elias Mendoza. Mr. Elias, this is Mary Martinez. I believe you both have something very important in common. The man looked at me with eyes full of sadness and shame before extending his hand to greet me. There was something in his gaze that I recognized immediately because it was the same pain I saw in the mirror every morning, the mark of betrayal. Sandra sat behind her desk and began to explain in a serious voice. During our investigation into Sarah Mendez, we discovered that she was previously married 4 years ago. Her husband at that time was the son of Mr. Elias. The pattern was exactly the same as with you, Mrs. Mary. Sarah convinced Elias's son that his father was too old to handle his own finances. She manipulated him until he obtained power over his father's accounts, and then, little by little, they began to transfer money. When Mr. Elias realized what was happening, they had already taken more than $120,000. His son and Sarah disappeared. They divorced shortly after, and Mr. Elias never filed a formal complaint. I felt the room spinning around me. I looked at Elias with horror and compassion mixed together. Why didn't you report it? I managed to ask with a trembling voice. The man lowered his gaze, ashamed. Because he was my son, Ma'am. I thought that if I reported him, his life would be ruined forever. I thought that maybe with time he would mature, that he would repent and return the money. But it never happened. He left the country with the money, and I never heard from him again. When I found out that Sarah had married again and what she had done to you, I knew I had to speak up. Not. Tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks, and I felt an immediate connection with this man who had lived my same hell. This completely changes the nature of the case, Sandra continued in a serious tone. We are no longer talking about an isolated incident. Sarah has an established pattern of manipulation and fraud. This is pure premeditation. She specifically looks for men who have elderly parents with assets, marries them, manipulates them into robbing their own parents, and then disappears with the money. She is a professional scammer. And your son Robert, Mrs. Mary, is her accomplice, although he is probably also a victim of her manipulation to some extent. Those words gave me a small hope that perhaps Robert wasn't completely a monster. Maybe he had been manipulated by a woman more calculating and experienced than him. But then I remembered the conversation I had overheard, the way Robert laughed imagining my face when I discovered the empty account. No, he wasn't just a victim. He had actively participated. He had enjoyed planning my ruin. What does this mean for my case? I asked Sandra urgently. It means we have a much stronger case, she replied with satisfaction in her voice. With Mr. Elias's testimony and the documentation of that previous case, we can demonstrate a pattern of criminal behavior. We have already obtained a court order to completely block the account where your money is deposited. Sarah tried to transfer the funds 2 days ago, but the transaction was rejected. Now she is desperate, trying to understand what happened. And Robert? I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Robert was summoned for questioning yesterday but did not appear. He sent a lawyer in his place, claiming he was sick. His lawyer says it was all a misunderstanding, that as power of attorney, he had the right to manage your money, that you had given him verbal permission to make the transfers. Of course, we don't believe him. especially now that we have Mr. Elias's testimony that demonstrates Sarah's modus operandi. I turned to Elias with curiosity. Your son also claimed you had given him permission? The man nodded sadly. He said I was senile, that I didn't remember giving him authorization. He used my age against me, and I felt so ashamed, so humiliated, that I preferred to let it all go and not fight. I took Elias's wrinkled hand in mine. This time is going to be different. This time we are going to fight together, and we are going to make sure that Sarah pays for what she did to both of us. I saw his eyes fill with tears again, but this time there was something more than sadness in them. There was hope. There was gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Mary. Thank you for having the courage I didn't. If my testimony can help you recover your money and send Sarah to jail, I will give it gladly. Rebecca, who had been silent all this time, wiped away the tears rolling down her cheeks. It was a heartbreaking but also powerful scene. Two elderly people uniting against the injustice they had suffered. Sandra explained the next steps to us. We are going to summon Sarah for questioning tomorrow morning. She can no longer refuse because we have enough evidence to arrest her if she doesn't cooperate. We will also issue a preventive arrest warrant for Robert if he does not voluntarily appear within the next 24 hours. With Mr. Elias's testimony, we have enough to prove that Sarah is a serial scammer and that Robert is her accomplice. The money of both of you will be recovered and returned. Her words filled me with a satisfaction I had never felt before. It wasn't revenge I was looking for. It was pure and simple justice. We left the district attorney's office with Elias and invited him out for coffee. We needed to talk, share our stories, and heal together in some way. We sat in a quiet coffee shop, and Elias began to tell us his full story. My son's name was Scott. He was a good boy until he met Sarah. She was like a poison that slowly entered his mind. At first, I found her pleasant, polite, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. She was always calculating, evaluating. When they started asking me for money for supposed emergencies, I gave it to them without hesitation, because I trusted my son. I never imagined they were systematically robbing me. How did you discover the truth? I asked him. Elias sighed deeply before answering. One day, I went to the bank to withdraw money to pay for a surgery I urgently needed. The teller looked at me confused and told me that my account was practically empty. I thought it was an error, that someone had hacked my account. But when they reviewed the transactions, they all bore Scott's authorization as my power of attorney. I confronted my son that same night, and he denied everything. He said I was confused, that I had probably made those withdrawals myself and didn't remember them. Sarah was there and looked at me with that fake smile while my son called me senile and told me I needed psychiatric help. "And what did you do?" Rebecca asked softly. "Nothing. I felt so humiliated, so ashamed, that I just stayed quiet. I let them leave with my money because I couldn't bear the idea of everyone knowing that my own son had robbed me. It was the worst decision of my life. Not only did I lose my money, I lost my dignity. I've lived these 4 years on a miserable pension, barely surviving, while my son and that woman were probably spending my money on luxuries." His story was heartbreaking and made me feel even more determined not to make the same mistake. The next day, I received a call early in the morning. It was Sandra, and her voice sounded triumphant. "Mrs. Mary, I have excellent news. Sarah was arrested this morning when she tried to leave the country. They found her at the airport with suitcases full of cash and jewelry that she apparently bought with the stolen money. Robert was with her. Both are in custody and will be formally prosecuted this afternoon. The cash they were carrying was confiscated as evidence, and we are tracking all the purchases they made in the last few weeks to recover everything possible." My legs almost gave way when I heard the news. Finally, after days of anguish and pain, justice was beginning to materialize. Rebecca arrived at my house minutes after I hung up the phone with Sandra. She had developed an almost psychic ability to know when I needed her. I told her everything in a voice choked with emotion. We both cried, but this time they were not tears of pain, but of relief and justice. "I knew you would do it," Rebecca said, hugging me tightly. "I knew your strength would win in the end. Now Robert and that viper are going to face the consequences of their actions." We spent the morning talking, drinking coffee, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few weeks. It was almost surreal to think that just a week ago, my life was normal, or what I thought was normal. Sandra called me again at noon to ask me to come to the district attorney's office that afternoon for the arraignment. "It is important that you be present," she told me. "Robert has asked to speak with you before the hearing. Of course, you are not obligated to see him if you don't want to, but I thought you should know." My first instinct was to refuse outright. What could Robert tell me that would justify what he had done to me? What words could repair the betrayal, the pain, the humiliation? But then I thought that maybe I needed that closure. I needed to look him in the eyes one last time and tell him everything I felt. "I agree to see him," I told Sandra with a firm voice, "but I want Rebecca to be present with me. I'm not going to face him alone." Sandra agreed and set up the meeting for 0 hours, 3 minutes. The hours until then passed with torturous slowness. I changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what to wear. What do you wear to confront the son who betrayed you? I finally decided on a dark grey dress that made me feel serious and respectable. I looked in the mirror and practiced what I would say to him. I had rehearsed 1,000 conversations in my mind during these days, but now that the moment was near, all the words seemed insufficient. Rebecca and I arrived at the district attorney's office exactly at 0 hours, 3 minutes. Sandra received us and took us to a small interrogation room. "Robert is in the next room," she explained. "You have 30 minutes. I will be outside in case you need anything. Remember, Mrs. Mary, that everything said here can be used as evidence in the process, so be careful with your words." I nodded, although I wasn't sure I could control my emotions when I saw Robert. The door opened, and there he was, my son, handcuffed and looking completely different from the man I knew. His face was drawn, he had deep dark circles, and his clothes were wrinkled. But what impacted me the most was his gaze. There was no longer arrogance or confidence. There was only fear and what seemed to be genuine regret. "Mom," Robert said with a broken voice as soon as he saw me. He tried to approach, but the handcuffs prevented him. I stood near the door with Rebecca by my side, holding my arm. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Seeing him like that, reduced and defeated, provoked such contradictory feelings that I didn't know if I wanted to hug him or slap him. "Mum, please," Robert continued with tears rolling down his cheeks. "I need you to listen to me. I need to explain what happened." I finally found my voice, and when I spoke, it sounded cold and distant, even to my own ears. "Explain it then. Explain how my own son, whom I loved and cared for his entire life, could steal everything I owned. Explain how you could laugh, imagining my face when I discovered the empty account." Robert lowered his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't want to do it. Mum, you have to believe me. Sarah manipulated me. She convinced me that you had more money than you needed, that you deserved to live more modestly in your old age. She made me believe that we were just taking what would eventually be my inheritance anyway." His words filled me with such intense rage that I felt I could explode. "Your inheritance," I repeated with a voice trembling with anger. Is that how you justify robbing your own mother? Thinking that it was money that would belong to you someday anyway? Robert, that money represented my security, my peace of mind, my dignified old age. Your father and I worked 40 years to build that wealth, and you took it as if it were yours by right, as if I didn't have the right to enjoy it or decide what to do with it. I know, Mum. I know, and I deeply regret it, Robert sobbed. Sarah poisoned my mind. She showed me a lifestyle I desperately wanted and convinced me that the only way to get it was by taking your money. But I swear I never wanted to hurt you. I thought somehow everything would be fine, that you would never find out, or that I would find a way to return the money eventually. His excuses sounded hollow and pathetic. You never wanted to hurt me, I said in disbelief. Robert, I heard you on the phone, laughing at me, imagining my suffering. That wasn't Sarah talking. That was you, your voice, your words, your cruel laughter. You can't blame her for everything when you participated actively and enthusiastically. Robert slumped into the chair and buried his face in his handcuffed hands. You're right. I can't just blame Sarah. I made the decisions. I made the transfers. I betrayed you. And now I'm going to pay for it, probably with years in prison. My life is ruined, my reputation destroyed, my career over. But the worst part is that I lost the most important person in my life. I lost my mother, and that hurts more than any punishment they can give me. His words would have softened my heart at another point in my life. But that moment had passed. The woman who had been his unconditional mother had died the day I overheard that phone conversation. You are going to prison, Robert, I told him with a firm, cold voice. You are going to pay for what you did to me. And when you get out, if you ever do, don't expect to find the mother you knew. That woman no longer exists. You killed her with your betrayal. Robert looked up, and I saw a pain so profound in his eyes that for a moment I felt something akin to compassion, but I immediately crushed it. Mum, please, he pleaded. I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that someday. When I've paid my debt to society and to you, you give me the chance to show you that I can change, that I can be the son I should have always been. I looked at this man who had been my baby, my boy, my teenager, my adult son, and felt as if I were looking at a stranger. I can't promise you anything, Robert. Right now, I only feel pain and disappointment. Maybe someday, in many years, I can find some peace about all this. But forgiveness, I don't know if I can ever give you that. I turned to leave, but Robert shouted my name, one last time. Mom, the money. It's almost all there in the account they blocked. We only spent about $20,000 on those jewels that were confiscated. The rest is there. Sandra says they're going to give it all back to you. At least there's that. At least I didn't leave you with nothing. His words did not console me. The money was important, yes, but what he had taken from me went far beyond dollars and cents. I walked out of that room with Rebecca holding me up because my legs could barely carry me. In the hallway, I sank into a chair and cried as I hadn't in weeks. I cried for the son I had lost, for the relationship that would never be the same, for the years of unconditional love that had been betrayed. Rebecca hugged me and let me cry on her shoulder without saying anything. Sometimes words are unnecessary when the pain is so deep. Sandra approached after a few minutes and waited patiently for me to calm down. The arraignment is in an hour, she said softly. Do you feel strong enough to attend, or would you prefer the prosecutor to represent you without your presence? I took a deep breath and dried my tears. I'm going to be there, I said with renewed determination. I need to see this through to the end. The hearing was exactly as difficult as I had imagined. Seeing Robert and Sarah standing before the judge, listening to the formal charges of misappropriation, fraud, and financial abuse against elderly persons, was like living a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Sarah maintained a harsh, defiant expression throughout the hearing, showing no trace of remorse. It was as if she had finally dropped the mask, and now I could see her true face, that of a cold, calculating predator. Robert, on the other hand, kept his head bowed throughout the process, unable to meet my eyes. The judge heard all the testimonies, reviewed the evidence, and finally dictated his decision. Both would remain in pretrial detention until the formal trial, which would take place in 3 months. Bail was set at such a high amount that I knew neither of them would be able to pay it. Elias was also present at the hearing, and his testimony was devastating. He spoke in a trembling yet firm voice about how his sons Scott and Sarah had left him ruined, about the years of shame and humiliation he had lived in silence. When he finished speaking, the judge looked at him with compassion and assured him that this time justice would not fail. Said, Elias, I deeply regret that you had to live 4 years with this injustice. Although it is too late to prosecute your son, who is apparently out of the country, I will make sure that Mrs. Mendez pays for all her crimes, including the one she committed against you. The judge's words gave Elias something he hadn't had in years: validation and hope. Sandra was brilliant in presenting the case. She showed Sarah's pattern of behavior, the similarities between my case and Elias's, the evident premeditation in every step of the plan. She also presented evidence that Sarah had been investigating other elderly people in the city, possibly looking for her next victim. There were lists of names on her computer, addresses, financial information that she could only have obtained illegally. It was a criminal operation much larger than anyone had initially imagined. The judge ordered a complete investigation to identify if there were more victims who had not reported the crimes. 3 months later, the day of the final trial arrived. In that time, my life had changed in ways I never imagined. Sandra had managed to recover almost all my money. The $260,000 that hadn't been spent were returned to my account, and the jewelry they had bought with the remaining $20,000 was sold to recover part of that amount. In the end, I only lost about $5,000, an insignificant amount compared to what could have been. But the money was the least of it. What I had truly lost was priceless. The trust in my son, the innocence of believing that family love was unbreakable, the peace of mind of feeling secure in my own old age. The trial was quick because the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, misappropriation, and being part of a criminal organization dedicated to the financial abuse of elderly people. During the investigation, they had found connections with other similar cases in different states. Robert received a sentence of 5 years, partially reduced because he had cooperated with the investigation and had shown genuine repentance. Also because the judge considered that he had been partially manipulated by Sarah, although he made it clear that this did not absolve him of his responsibility. Mr. Ruiz, the judge told him in a severe tone, you betrayed the person who loved you the most in this world. You betrayed your mother, the woman who gave you life and dedicated her entire existence to caring for you. That is a crime that goes beyond the legal. It is a moral crime that will haunt you for the rest of your life. When the judge dictated the sentences, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, yes, but at what cost? My son would go to prison. The family I once had was destroyed forever. But I also knew that I had done the right thing. By reporting Robert and Sarah, I had not only protected my own wealth, I had prevented them from continuing to destroy other families. I had given a voice to victims like Elias, who had suffered in silence. I had shown that elderly people are not easy targets, that we have dignity and the right to defend ourselves. After the trial, Elias approached me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having the courage I didn't. Because of your bravery, I can finally sleep in peace, knowing that woman can no longer hurt anyone." I hugged him tightly, feeling a deep connection with this man who had shared my pain. "Thank you too, Elias. Your testimony was crucial. Without you, perhaps Sarah would have remained free, destroying more lives." We exchanged phone numbers and promised to keep in touch. We had formed a friendship born of shared suffering, but also shared victory. The following months were a period of slow but steady healing. Rebecca was by my side every step of the way, helping me rebuild my life. I decided to sell the house where I had lived for so many years, because every corner reminded me of Robert, of the happy moments that were now stained by betrayal. I bought a smaller apartment in a building with other residents my age. It was a new beginning, a blank page where I could write a different story for my golden years. I also decided to do something meaningful with my experience. Together with Elias and with Sandra's support, we created a support group for elderly people who had been victims of financial abuse by family members. We met once a week at a community centre and shared our stories, our pain, but also our victories. I discovered that there were many more victims than I imagined, people who had been robbed by sons, grandsons, nieces, and nephews, and who carried the shame in silence. Our group gave them a safe space to talk, to heal, to regain their dignity. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Robert from prison. I held it in my hands for days without opening it, unsure if I wanted to read what he had to say. Finally, one quiet afternoon, while having coffee on my new balcony, I gathered the courage to open it. The letter was full of apologies, remorse, and pleas for forgiveness. Robert told me he had started therapy in prison, that he was trying to understand how he had reached that point, how he had allowed greed and manipulation to destroy the most valuable thing he had. He told me he didn't expect me to forgive him, that he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but that he needed me to know that he spent every day of his sentence thinking about the harm he had caused me. I read the letter 3 times before putting it away in a drawer. I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe I never would be. Forgiveness is not something that can be forced or rushed. It is a personal process that everyone does at their own pace, if they ever do it. For now, I focused on healing, on rebuilding my life, on finding purpose and meaning in my days. I had discovered that I was stronger than I thought, more capable than I imagined. I had faced the worst possible betrayal and had survived. More than surviving, I had thrived in a different way. One afternoon, almost a year after all the drama, I was sitting in a coffee shop with Rebecca and Elias. We had become an inseparable trio, united by our experiences, but also by genuine mutual affection. Elias looked at me with that warm smile that I had learned to appreciate and said, "Mary, do you know what the most ironic thing about all this is? Robert and Sarah thought that by robbing you, they would take away your strength, your security, your future. But all they managed to do was show you how incredibly strong you are. They took money, yes, but you recovered much more than that. You recovered your dignity, your voice, your power." His words reached deep into my heart because he was right. I had lost my son, at least for now, but I had gained myself. That night, back in my apartment, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of hot tea and looked out the window at the illuminated city. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had lost, but also everything I had gained. I had learned that unconditional love does not mean allowing abuse. I had learned that defending what is right sometimes requires extremely painful decisions. I had learned that family is not always who shares your blood, but who stands by your side in the darkest moments. And above all, I had learned that it is never too late to be brave, to defend your dignity, to start anew. I smiled as I took a sip of tea and thought of the words I had once said, words that had become my mantra. Today I am alone, but for the first time in years, I am at peace, and that is priceless. Life had taught me that sometimes the price of peace is extremely high, but it is always, always worth paying.